Was Abraham justified twice? Once in Genesis 15 and then again in Genesis 22. Get Romans 4 verse 1. I'll read the rest of the question here. If the content of the faith is different for different groups, and Abraham was justified by faith only in Genesis 15, which is the example Paul uses for us, and in Genesis 22, Abraham was justified by faith with works, which is the example James used for Israel, does this mean Abraham was justified twice, once for our example, and then again for Israel's example? So look with me at Romans 4, verse 1. Romans chapter 4 and verse 1. What shall we say then? That Abraham our father, as pertaining to the flesh, hath found. For if Abraham were justified by works, he hath whereof to glory, but not before God. For what saith the Scripture? Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him for righteousness. Romans 4:3 is a quotation of Genesis 15:6. I'm just going to read it to you. Genesis 15:6, and he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. So Abraham was counted righteous in Genesis 15. God did not give him circumcision until Genesis 17. So therefore, Abraham was clearly declared righteous in uncircumcision, because he was declared righteous in Genesis 15 and circumcision didn't come till later. Now look at Romans 4 verse 9. Cometh this blessedness then upon the circumcision only, or upon the uncircumcision also? For we say that faith was reckoned to Abraham for righteousness. How was it then reckoned? When he was in circumcision or in uncircumcision? Not in circumcision, but in uncircumcision. So if there was any doubt, Romans 4, 9, and 10 makes clear Abraham was reckoned to be righteous when he was uncircumcised. Now get with me James chapter 2, verse 21. James chapter 2 and verse 21. James 2:21. Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he had offered Isaac his son upon the altar? Now we're going to come back to James 2, but get with me Genesis 22. So what James 2:21 says, was not Abraham our father justified by works when he had offered Isaac his son upon the altar? Well, the offering of Isaac upon the altar, that takes place in Genesis 22. So it's obviously after Genesis 15, it's obviously after Genesis 17. Genesis 22 verse 10. And Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thine son, thine only son, from me. Now I know that that verse says, For now I know that thou fearest God. Let me ask you a question. When God watched those events unfold, was God surprised and was God learning something new? I mean, he can't, right? There's nothing that God watches history unfold and says, wow, that was a shocker. Can't wait to see what happens next. I mean, that doesn't happen. God is proving Abraham's obedience to Abraham, not God. Hopefully you can agree with that statement. God already knew what Abraham was going to do. Now go back with me to James 2, verse 22. James 2, verse 22. Seest thou how faith wrought with his works, and by works was faith made perfect? Now we talked about this moments ago, but let me briefly just make the point. A man is never justified by works. A man is always justified by faith. Sometimes the instructions to man require a work to manifest the faith. So for example, if God tells Noah, Noah, I'm flooding the earth, and therefore you need to build an ark for me to deliver you. If Noah had said, I believe you, but I don't feel persuaded to build an ark, that would represent unbelief. In other words, that would represent not really believing what God had said about flooding the earth. Now look with me at James 2:23. James 2:22 made the point, by works was faith made perfect. In other words, under some points on the timeline, the work demonstrates the existence of actual faith. Now look at verse 23. And the scripture was fulfilled, which saith, Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness. James 22, verse 23 is going back to Genesis 15. You see the point? Abraham was declared righteous in Genesis 15. What followed after that was simply a declaration, a manifestation of the faith that he already had. Look at verse 24. Ye see then how that by works a man is justified, and not by faith only. So the question that was asked was whether Abraham had two different justifications. You know, I guess you could look at it that way. It seems to me it's better to just view it as a single justification. The justification is by faith, but in time past, faith was made perfect. It was made complete by works. Today, we're justified by faith without any manifestation of works.